back to Through the Veil with Elle and Camille. I'm Camille.
And oh,
We are here for part two with Lindsay Garlock. We are going to continue this conversation and discuss more about spirit teams and ways to interpret these experiences that we're having.
we've been talking about where to use discernment, where to be careful. We've been talking about the people that are codependent
Right.
and how believing every single thing or taking everything really literally could be dangerous.
Yeah. And or our own filter, our own bias. Belief systems influence the things that we're getting to very
Yeah.
strongly.
Yeah.
So I think the another area where the path often diverges for people, where it gets kind of sticky, is that we also have to use that discernment to kind of know what to take from people who are exercising their gifts and what not to take. Because there are when you're working intuitively, when you're working within these things that are at their essence intangible, right? They're not concrete. It's really important to get validation. It's really important to get that evidence, that proof, so you can kind of know that what you're bringing through has some kind of realistic bearing, right? And so we're not just following flights of fancy, which is why things like your husband and his dad confirming each other in that moment are so important. But there are times when we go see, people who may be exercising this gift in a way, and we learn information that can be challenging or strange, or it's like they'll tell you something intuitively and you don't have to take that, right? Because everything we're getting is passing through our own filter, our own specific belief system. It's just the way that it works in mortality. So even somebody who is super in tune is going to have an intrinsic bias of some kind, right? And so if they're giving you information that doesn't settle with you, that doesn't necessarily fit your own particular perspective or belief system or something, do challenge that. It
Yeah.
might be right, but it also could be not right, right? It could
Right.
be we're not 100%. We're never
Use your
100% all
own
the time.
gift of discernment to go and check. You can pray about what came up at a session. You can journal about it and kind of just ponder and sit with it, meditate with it, and check it with your own ability to receive discernment.
Right.
That's
There's truth in a lot of places, but it's not always 100%. You
which
can
is
have
part of why
most truth.
thank you. I was so excited to reconnect. And I haven't told my story of how I know you, Elle and Camille and McKinley and the others. But I was so excited to reconnect with this particular group of women to learn more about your understanding through a Christian lens. And when I was starting to really want to know more about spirituality, this type of spirituality, something that always held me back was this past lives concept. And I was almost afraid to ask. I was like, do you guys believe in past lives? Like what? Like that
They
is
seem
maybe
almost synonymous in the work, right? It seems almost like it has to be part of this,
like
like it
Yeah.
has
they
to
go
belong.
together.
Yeah.
Because that's something that always, when I thought of mediums, I always thought, they're going to tell you about these past lives. And I didn't know how to reconcile that. And I've been so grateful I have a pretty well-developed idea at this point about what I personally believe. And it ties in really well with our conversation about the spirit guides and ministering angels, because I personally believe that if you were told, or if you have an experience that you feel that you had a past life, that it is the life of someone that you were a ministering angel for when they were embodied. So you were a spirit, just like we talked about with my aunt and my mom, how they kind of lived their life together. Those lives kind of become intertwined.
Right.
So my aunt it wasn't her in the flesh having these experiences that my mom was. My mom was the one in the flesh having them. But because she was there as a spirit guide throughout the whole thing, and even for her death, why would she not be there at the death? If you're a
Right.
spirit guide, you're a ministering angel more or less assigned. And I believe we have ministering angels that are lifelong, like your lifelong kind of partner. And then I also believe in these kind of drop-ins and you
Yeah.
can call on, like, I really need someone in this way right now. And it
In
would
this
be
aspect. Like,
Special ops.
Oh, different.
yeah, special op.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah. But
this is my
my
special op angel.
so when my husband died that weekend, my brother-in-law came to visit, and we were cleaning out my husband's closet,
And this is his
and we were
brother, right? So
yes,
his,
so John,
okay.
yeah, so my husband John's brother. So we're in our bedroom and we're cleaning this out. And I said to Joseph, I said, this, this is where he died. This is where it was, on the floor. And I told him, I just lay here sometimes. I just come and lay in this spot because not because I don't know, I just feel close to something.
Hmm.
And he asked, like, would you mind if I did that as well? And I said, yeah, please go ahead. And I stepped out to just give him some privacy to do that. And later he told me that when he laid down in that place, he had a very powerful spiritual experience where he felt that somehow when John passed, his spirit was there with him. He was with him through it. And the reason he told me this is because I'd had all these feelings of like John being alone. It made me so sad to think that he died alone. And like, what was he feeling? Was he scared? Was he, it just was like he was alone and going through this. And I wish he hadn't been alone. Like it made me sad and upset. So my brother-in-law was saying he wasn't alone. When I was in the room, I felt that I somehow my spirit was there with him. And also my son was there. And at this point, they do not have a son. They just have one daughter and they weren't pregnant with any other children. But he said, I know that my son is still in the spirit world was also there as a spirit guide, as a ministering angel to bring him through this transition. And I think how interesting that to know, okay, he was there and this baby is going to be born now in a few months. And I'm imagining, right? Like, could this baby in life, whether knowing it for himself some way or, right, let's talk hypothetical. If he went to a particular type of medium and she or he said, in a past life, these things, this was your life and this is how you died. And it mirrored like John's life in a way and John's death
Mm-hmm.
because he was
So you
there.
are the reincarnation of John, right? Logical
Right.
conclusion
So
from
it's like,
that,
hey,
right?
you are yeah, in your
Mm-hmm.
past life, you were John, sort of. But
Yeah.
I don't believe in past lives. I really believe because of the atonement of our Savior Jesus Christ, that we have one beautiful mortal life to live, and that um we don't have to relive and repeat to learn from our mistakes, to over and over again. But that Christ's atonement is how that completion happens, is how that wholeness comes to
Yeah.
be.
That healing
Through,
power.
yeah, it's not through
Yeah,
practice makes perfect over so many
it's
lifetimes.
grace.
It's grace.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I feel like we should mention kind of at this moment that um I'm totally with you on this belief train, but I think a lot of people, this is a really segregated topic.
Yeah.
Like it's a hot button topic. People have really strong feelings around. And there are people who do say they have experiences to the contrary that like make them firm believers in past lives and the like the reincarnation cycle and the perfection of the soul in that kind of system. And I totally respect those beliefs because everything we have here, like I said, it all comes through a filter, comes through your personal belief system, it comes through your own experiences, and it has to work that way. So it's all really theory until we get to the other side and we get a personal experience of how this is actually in operation. But I do think a lot of people jump on the train of that because the evidence that is presented in that way oftentimes sides with that. It's the popular bandwagon, right?
Hmm.
It's the one that everybody believes.
Especially
Like we said, it
lately,
must
I've
be
noticed.
synonymous with spiritualism.
Yeah, this shift has happened. I feel like
Yeah.
recently, like it's been a big shift where there's a lot of people that believe in it. Whereas I think before it was considered more like an Eastern
Yeah.
thing.
And I think Eastern, it is. And if we're going to talk about the history of reincarnation and where that thought process comes from, it is the karma cycle in Buddhism and Hinduism. We don't have to go into that background. This is my wheelhouse.
Can
Like this
I'd
is
love
my
to hear.
educational system. I'm super familiar with it. They don't have a concept of ultimate deity or God. They do have human progression, but it stops, at a certain point. And, you can argue it's nirvana, or like the culmination of human achievement would then be to reach, a state like Buddha, right? And then it's interesting how we have kind of taken that and blended it with Christianity in a really interesting way that people are finding is synchronistic, and that's totally fine with me. I'm like, this is what happens. Like, we take the truth from everywhere, right, and we stick it in a conglomerate however best suits us, and who's to say that's right or that's wrong? But I do think a lot of people jump on that just because it's the option presented, and logically it seems to make sense within the evidence. But just evidence is one of those interesting things that, depending on how you interpret it, it can be radically different,
Right.
right? Radically different. Like people who um, just to use an analogy, like with science, before we knew bacteria was the cause of disease, it's evil spirits. Totally logical for where they were
Mm,
sitting.
right.
Totally logical, right? An evil spirit is in your body and it's making you die. You must be exorcised or something to those extents. And
Hmm.
then we learn it is something, it is definitely something interacting with our body. It's just not what we thought it was. Like the
Right.
just shifted slightly. And it's actually these microorganisms that are making us sick, right? We don't ever have the full picture, and that's fully expanding all the time. So there are other evidences, like you were saying, that make logical sense that aren't always presented as possibilities. So I do love to play the devil's advocate all the time. And I'm like, yes, but also maybe this,
Yeah.
right? And balance these things. There's
Yeah.
lots of theories. There's lots of explanations of how this could work.
Right.
And
I
I think
do.
that's important to do. The Christian perspective is such a small minority that are coming to the conversation table about spirituality and spiritual gifts.
Mhm.
It's, I think it's a brave thing and a worthwhile thing to voice that this could be an explanation
Could be.
rather
Yeah.
than, like me, like I was so timid. Like, I'm scared to have a
It's hard to
diversion,
approach
to have a divergent opinion
Mhm. Or even
perspectives.
because,
a
Yeah.
wonder.
and I exactly, even well, I wonder if, and I think, I do believe in certain things being reincarnated. And what I believe is that almost like generational family lessons, some people might use the word like family curses or generational trauma,
Generational trauma.
but those can be reincarnated until someone is a breaker of that cycle. That, in a past, it's not so much, this is kind of my understanding. It's not that in a past life I struggled with XYZ, and so now I'm reborn and I'm going to relive until I can learn my lesson. But in my lineage,
Hmm.
this has been a thing and it didn't quite get, resolved here. And so I am born with this inherited um
Struggle.
predisposition, yeah, to struggle with something. And so it's like genetics are reincarnated.
Trauma
Yeah.
is not
Epigenetics.
reincarnated. Yes, exactly.
Epigenetics,
Which is an alternate theory for reincarnation, by the way.
Yeah.
totally a believer
Mm.
in, which goes back to, so I feel like, and I know I have other spirit guides, but I predominantly identify with my great grandmother and how our lives were very similar. And even other ancestors I can think of whose lives were very similar and struggled with similar things. And it gives me a lot of motivation to think that my actions really matter in life and that I can serve them in an
Yeah.
actual powerful, meaningful, real way.
Right.
It's not just for me. And we think like I I used to be so isolated, and it was like, I'm an island. I don't need anyone, and no, and like, and I've found so much empowerment in connection, not just with others around me, but with my people, my lineage. And I feel so much more motivated to try to overcome hard things, that my kind of natural predisposition would be to just throw up my hands and say, not in this life.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
Hmm.
that's, you know what, that's something I will work on in the eternities, but in mortality, I give up. Like, I'm not going to be able to conquer that demon. But when I come from the lens of, if you can, Lindsay, think about how much you will make an impact on your family line, both before and after you.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're not embodied. We've talked about this, especially in that Thomas McConkie episode. They're not embodied. So there's certain lessons that like aren't going to make as much sense, even if you try to learn them after you go to the spirit world. But if you can learn that lesson and they can experience it through you and your body, then there's more of a profound effect. Like it's like you've kind of helped that whole line heal because you've done it within a body. There's something to it.
I've had that happen in so many different like sessions with people. It's really interesting. Spirit communication is a really healing thing. It usually has its lane of healing, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's grief. Oftentimes it's like helping someone find peace or release in something. But also sometimes it's about like opportunities missed. Like so frequently, generational triggers come in. Like somebody suffered alcoholism,
Hmm.
right? And their grandfather did, and his grandfather did. It come down through their father. And they had this childhood that was just devastating to them because their father had alcoholism, right? And then they see that pattern, they're afraid of pushing it forward. And when they can process that grief, when they can change, they can shift direction and make that change in their life. Um, it it releases backwards. And I can feel that release happening backwards. When that forgiveness can happen, it releases backwards. And so the choices that they're making, the movements that they're shifting through by changing direction of what they're going to do in this life, they're not going to become an alcoholic. Or if they are, they're going to overcome that. They're going to go to AA and they're going to make different choices. Like it radically shifts their children's lives going forward, but also it releases something going backward in time. And so often those relationships, those family members, they are grateful. They are changed. They no longer have to carry that because that energy has dissipated. It's been released because someone here embodied, conquered it, and
Hmm.
shifted all of that for them. It comes up way more than I had expected going into this work.
And I think sometimes for me, saying backwards and backwards in time, that's really hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, but to think of it as upward, um,
Yeah,
because it's not like all of a sudden history was altered,
right.
but that they are alive concurrently, like simultaneously with us, not on earth, but in spirit. And, what doesn't matter. It's just semantics. But for me, somehow thinking of it as this upward um effect feels like the things I do on earth right now affect other people, other spirits right now. I don't know, does that do anything for you? Like
Yes. Yes.
thinking of it that way? Because I have a hard time with
Also,
the like back
don't you think this would make an
drop.
amazing storyline for a movie?
Wouldn't it? We should contact
We need to
Hollywood.
have Rachel write the script and then we'll
Contact,
move forward with this
to-do
fantastic
list.
idea.
Contact Hollywood.
To-do list for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think going back to reincarnation, the thought of like, there's the whole like out focus in science right now on like genetics, right? We're mapping the human genome. We're finding all kinds of crazy stuff that we never thought we knew and that we carry from past generations. We're
Yeah.
finding out how trauma and emotion change our cells and our DNA, like our
Yep.
very thing. And it is, I think, totally feasible. Science is just now beginning, like very beginning, baby steps on seeing how our life, what we're living, impacts our DNA. This DNA we're handing to our children, right? We always have. Just because we're now discovering it doesn't mean it's changing future. Like we've always done this. So when you have an experience, it's kind of encapsulated biologically in your body. When you have a trauma, when you have an emotion, when you have something strong that you're going through, you're literally putting that into your cellular structure, which we're then giving to our children in our lives. So it totally would make sense to me that sometimes when we encounter things that are triggering for us, it could be within our very DNA that we have a memory, we have a story, we have something that we've experienced from 4 generations back, right? If you can inherit a physical trait, why could you not inherit an emotional trait or a spiritual trait, right? That come through and that you can then experience and be like, oh, well, this is so clear to me, just like grandpa. Maybe I am grandpa, right? Just another alternate explanation.
I have a cousin who has told me about an experience she had while using plant medicine. And she was doing a lot of work, trauma work, and she was trying really in this place of a certain thing. And the image she had was of all of a sudden a grave opening next to her and a hand coming out of the grave and taking the things she was struggling with and saying, I'm sorry, that's not yours, that's mine. And
Oh,
taking it back
Wow.
wow.
and apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry. That's not yours. You don't need that anymore. I'll take that back. And then that grave closing.
Wow.
And in her healing of this felt like it really wasn't hers. But she was carrying it. It, came through her. It was reincarnated with, that particular thing was given to her from an ancestor that wasn't hers to carry. And she was able to do this work of healing and releasing it.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a powerful experience.
Yeah.
There's a whole line of argument that can be made when something is inherited like that. It really does feel like yours. It feels like it's yours, right? And this is a huge argument people make where it's like, no, this memory is mine. Like it's mine. I feel like I was there. I lived it. It's
Because you can
visceral,
feel it in your body. It's very strong.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a there's a whole nother lane of perspective we can take with that, where it's like sometimes things are handed down so strongly like that that we seem to claim them. I mean, empaths have this problem all the time, where they'll
Oh.
absorb emotion from someone else and have such a hard time being like, why am I so sad? Like it may not be till days later where they realize, oh, I interacted with that person and they were really sad.
Or
And
I watched that TV show and it brought me down. So I was like carrying the burdens
Yeah,
of this
I'm
ensemble
really,
cast. This is us. Come on, it can be really dramatic sometimes.
I'm really susceptible to that particular thing.
Me too.
I don't watch TV, honestly. I do not watch TV or movies like for that reason.
highly
Yeah, you
sensitive
take on.
people, it's a struggle. But I also really love the train of thought with that, with to explore further with guides and spirit guides. I mean, in our personal context of our faith tradition, we have a really strong belief that there was something before we came here. And I think just in Christianity, like we were created by God, right? We were created. We had it before. We had a purpose. We may have served as spirit guides on somebody else's team and lived through that. Like we could have, like you were talking about earlier, Lindsay, we could have gone through it with them, right? And our spirit had the experience. That memory is there
Yeah,
inside of us. And if you are someone who is sensitive or tends to have, a deep spiritual practice, whether that's meditation or that is, a spiritual gift that is just a deep intuition, you're connecting to that divine nature that you have, that higher self that you have, the spiritual capacity that you have. You're connecting to who you were before, who you will be. Makes total sense that that would come up, right? Be lived with you as a memory that is in you as you were there with someone else in their fighter
yeah.
plane in World War II
I
going into the ocean.
Oh yeah. I always the visual of like a line, like a string going on, and that's your life, like that's your eternal life, and how Earth life was just like a little knot, like a tiny, you
Mhm.
guys remember kind of um being given that visual. It always, I was like, really? Just that? like this seems so substantial. And it seems like also everything, a lot is hinging on this, like a lot.
Right.
And maybe we should give it a yard on the string instead of just a tiny knot. It just feels a little bit invalidating.
In a roll of yarn, it's a
We
yarn.
talk about like so much hinges on this. And my mind has really, it's felt blown open, really expanded to think that, yes, this is my one and only physical mortal life, but this is not my first earth experience. I know that I have had experiences as a spirit guide or a ministering angel, whether for a person's lifetime that I lived with them,
Or
even
moments.
even through their death, or
Mhm.
touch point moments.
Right.
And those served me because I learned so much. That was part of the tutoring.
The prep.
Right.
My patriarchal blessing talks about the tutoring that happened prior to coming here. And it feels so like, okay, you're going to learn to drive a car, but you're not going to get in the car at all until you've read all these books. It's not like we give a driver's license without
The first
any
time.
experience in the car. You
It's a
cannot
great analogy.
you cannot read all the lessons and hear all the stories and have it all explained to you and have like this understanding as close as you can without experiencing any time in the car, or even imagine if you'd never even been in a car before. Like,
Right.
because before you learn to drive, you are in a
As a
ar
passenger.
you're a
Yeah.
passenger, right? And look, that's a good way to think of it. Like, you're kind of a passenger. You're this sidecar, like my buddy.
Sidecar experience.
So I know that that's part. I really believe that that's part of our progression and preparation for Earth life, to have those experiences. And
Yeah.
they taught us, um, they gave us experience and wisdom, the whole,
They set us up, right?
right. And these ideas
Preparatory.
of people being wise beyond their years, or being an old soul. You hear that a
Right.
lot, and you think about, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I got to tutor with these people. And it even makes me wonder about like faith traditions. And I come from a line of the same faith tradition, where my ancestors were a part of the restoration, very tied to it. My great
Right.
great great grandfather is Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith's brother. And so that's my heritage. And so how many opportunities did I have to come in and learn along the way? And how has that impacted what I've been able to learn now here?
Right.
Just things I think about, questions I have.
If we are immortal spirits, right? If we are like eternal in nature of what we are, um, matter does not it's not cannot be destroyed. It can be changed, can't be destroyed, right? Um, think about the eons that happened before we even got here. Like I'm like, yes, the string is a great metaphor for that because we are like a knot and a knot here, beginning and end. But how much farther did it exist? How many times were we helping someone? How long did we have this learning process before, and how long did it come after? If we think about eternity afterwards, right? Spending eternity with God on the other side, after judgment or resurrection or whatever happens next, that was mirrored before we even got here, right? From the creation of matter of our soul, how long did we exist in that preparatory state before we had a chance to come here? Maybe at least the history of the world. At least you think about how many people have lived lives here that you could have helped. How
Right.
many generations just in the creation of Earth? But was that the beginning for our souls?
Maybe not.
We don't know, right? So just like that concept alone, I think is like we could have had that many experiences helping people. It totally makes sense to have that memory maybe surface, to have that experience having passed through time with that.
help those people, why would they not be helping us now? Because when it's
Right,
our turn, it's our blip, it's our not, they're
Yeah.
going to be here. They're
Hmm.
going
right.
to be here with you.
And we knew them before. Like we had interaction with them. And if we served as that lifetime guide all the way through, like it doesn't stop just because you pass. They help with the processing and the reintegration process after passing, right? They're still involved with us, even in the spirit world. We have knowledge of them. They have knowledge of us. It isn't one way. It's never one way. Like the plan of God is always bigger than that. If I can, there's one last theory that I love, in contrary to reincarnation, and that is because I'm biased here. It's spirit communications, and there's all these stories about children, like 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, where they'll tell these extravagant stories of like when I was big, when I was mom, when I was
Hmm.
grandpa, or they'll use like words. That they are not in their vocabulary, or like talk
Yeah.
about something, you're going somewhere and you see something and your 2-year-old is like, oh, this and this and this and this and this about this thing, right?
Yeah.
um Children especially, I will say, are really close to that veil, really close to that veil, and all those people who are on the other side interacting with them, the swarm of mayflies that are around us constantly. If great grandpa was in World War II in that fighter plane that went down, and you're at a World War II museum and there's a fighter plane, and your 2-year-old has almost got like, oh my gosh, it crashed right here in the ocean. And grandpa, I was grandpa and I died right here in the ocean. It would make total sense if grandpa is there talking to 2-year-old Max
Mm.
about his experience passing, right?
Yeah.
Because he lived it and he's like, this plane, I was there. This is what happened to me in this plane. It fell. He's merely sharing his experiences with Max, who is totally cognizant of the spirit world in this moment. Like it's just spirit communication happening.
Yeah.
And oftentimes spirit communication will happen through images. It will happen through words. It will happen through feelings, which as a 2 or 3-year-old, even as an adult, can be really, sometimes if you're not aware of where it's coming from, easily misinterpreted as your own information, right? If you look at this World War II plane and all of a sudden you have this image of it crashing and you feel that hitting the water and you feel, the impact in your body, possibly this is spirit communication that's happening to you right now because great grandfather is standing next to you and showing you that information that he experienced, that he was there for. So I think that is a huge element that maybe we could
I
discuss.
absolutely agree. And I studied human development and child development. And I remember studying the concept of self and then the concept of relationships forming. So for example, a child, there's an age where they can't understand that their mom could be your sister or
Yes.
grandma's daughter. They're
Right.
just like, mommy is mom. Like my mom is my mom.
Right.
I can't understand, or grandma is grandma, and they can't understand that their grandma is that, all those
My
relationships, they can't
5-year old's going through this
that
right now.
my
He's like, when
mom
you were a kid, who was your
is
mom?
grandma's daughter, and
Yeah.
Yeah. They
and
can't map.
that's they can't, and it's very well illustrated in what you just shared, that they can't make certain distinctions with certain um just development of the brain. It hasn't
Right.
happened yet
Yeah.
And even as adults, I think that information can still be, perceived as your own, right? If you
because it's
experience
very
something very, very strongly. Like I've had sessions with people. One of the most, distinct that comes to mind is it was actually a missing persons case. And someone brought this case to me. It was a really good friend of hers, boyfriend. And we had no idea where he went or what happened, right? And I was doing this reading, this session with her, trying to get some maybe intuitive idea of what was going on. And his spirit came to me so strongly. And he showed me, I was looking through his eyes. This is one of the most visceral experiences I've ever had with this gift. I saw what he saw as he was standing on a cliff on the coast of northern mid California, right north of San Francisco. And I saw him looking out at the ocean. I saw it was sunset. I saw all the detail. And then I jumped and I felt falling through the air. I felt my stomach go up like when you're, roller coaster moment. I felt the wind. I felt it whistling. I heard it in my ears. I saw the motion. I saw the water rise up. I felt the impact of hitting the water. And then I felt the impact of going underneath and struggling for air and knowing that the end. It was like in my, I was seeing it, I was feeling it, I was hearing it, I was totally immersed
Yeah.
in this sensation. The story playing out, like I was with him at the time of his death when he jumped from this cliff. And then he showed me where his body was, and then he showed me where it would be found. Give it 6 months, we had no idea. We had no contact. They had been looking for him. He was found exactly the place that I saw him, in exactly the way that I saw him found, which blew me away at the time. I was like, what? But it validated that experience. If I had not had so much experience with spirit communication, if I was not so familiar with the process of what I was doing and the fact that I was connecting to someone else, I would have been so confused. It was so real. I
Yeah.
was there. I was going through it. It felt even more than a memory, right? Because I was experiencing with him. So if I hadn't had my background in this, I could totally see me mistaking that for something that actually had
A
happened. I
past
would
life for
be
you.
right. It would be so that would be the only explanation I could think of. I'm like, how would I have this experience without having, like, I don't remember that now, but it felt so real.
So
What is
personal.
the explanation for this? Right.
Yeah.
So I think even as adults, sometimes things happen that are unexplainable, and we reach for the closest possible explanation that we have as a reference point,
Hmm.
which may be reincarnation. Wow, we have talked about so many awesome things. Thank you so much for your time, Lindsay. It's always fantastic to have these conversations with you. Once again, Lindsay Garlock, she can be found at The Acceptance Girl on Instagram. And she has great things to say all the time. You can follow her there. If you want to get in communication with us, you want to be on the podcast, you have an experience to share, you can always reach out through email. We also have a website, which is throughtheveilepodcast.com. And Camille and I can both be found there. If you would like to schedule a session with us or share an experience, we love to hear any kind of feedback. If you would like to subscribe and follow us, it's always helpful. Share with your friends, let people know who are looking for this kind of information. The community is always a huge motivation for us to connect with everybody who's looking for, some support in this area. If you want to hit that bell button, it will help our algorithm so that people can jump on and we can be more seen and heard.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. This has been so fun. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you guys so much. Love it.
See you guys next time on Through the Veil.
Bye.